it's the year of the agents. If 2024 wasn't already the year of agents for AI, because they make RAGs more reliable in that you have less hallucinations. So a RAG system where it's really just retrieving information and then generating a bit of information on top of the retrieved stuff. So it's like glorified search in a way to make sure what it retrieves is the right stuff. And also when something is generated is also the right stuff, or it pertains to the question that was asked. You can throw in some agents or some reflections in there and it can have less hallucinations. So I would say agents in 2025, 100%. I would like to see some new way that we can interact with agents, and maybe it's going to be that standing up agents is much easier on the back end, because right now it's very piecemeal.
Welcome back to Alexa's Input, the podcast where we explore the intersection of technology, innovation, and impact. Today, I'm happy to welcome a guest who's been at the forefront of shaping the MLOps landscape, Demetrios Brinkmann. Demetrios is the leader of the MLOps Community, a widespread network that has become a cornerstone for professionals navigating the rapidly evolving fields of machine learning, operations, and AI development. Known for fostering collaboration, sharing insights, and challenging conventional thinking, he's created a space where both practitioners and thought leaders come together to push the boundaries of what's possible with AI. So, without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. Demetrios, welcome to Alexa's Input. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Wow, what an intro. I appreciate that so much. You're too kind.
No, I mean, it's all true, right? So, first, can you tell me a bit about your journey into tech? How did you get here? How did you start the MLOps community? For those who don't know, what is it? Everything.
All of it. So the TLDR is that I was working as an English teacher in Spain, and my daughter was born in 2018, and I kind of had a come to Jesus moment where I was like, teaching English is great, but I've got a family to support now, and I think I should do something a little bit more serious. And so, for
Yeah.
anybody that has ever had English classes abroad, they know, or has taught English abroad, it's great and it's fun, but people go to the beach during the summer and they don't want English classes. So, for like 3 months of the year, I wasn't really working. I was kind of like just pretending to work. And so my daughter was born, and my friend was in sales for a company that was doing password management. And he told me, man, you would probably be good in this. I think you should try and join us, see if you can get a job at the company I'm at. And I did that. I got the job. And then a few weeks later, he left that company. And so I was enjoying being in sales for a little bit. And I ended up transferring jobs into a job that was focused on data lineage in 2019. And I was still in sales, but I was starting to learn about the whole machine learning world and starting to learn about terms like MLOps. And that company went out of business in 2020. But right before it went out of business, well, you can kind of assume why. Like, data lineage still is a hard sell for people in 2024. And in 2020, it was way too early. And so after it went out of business, or I should say, like right before the company went out of business, our CEO, in a last ditch attempt to salvage something, he said, hey, maybe we should try like a community play. And I was put in charge of that because another thing that was happening in 2020, I don't know if you remember, was the pandemic, and everything went online. And so there was this lightning in a bottle that happened, and the everything was going online. So it was very easy for us to start doing online stuff. And since we were focused as the company around MLOps, we were like, oh, let's just call it the MLOps community. And then I ran with it. The company went out of business a week later. And I said, you know what? I think I'll kind of keep going, because there were some early signals that people were interested in talking about MLOps, and there wasn't really a place on the internet to do that. And since then, it's evolved into much more than just a virtual event type of community or a Slack workspace that we had. And we talk much more about everything from the whole life cycle, right? From data engineering for ML to machine learning platforms, even like the data science side of things, the reliability side of things, so DevOps. And now with the explosion of LLMs and AI agents, we have a little bit of all of that. And so it encompasses a ton of different stuff in what we talk about. But at its core, it's just folks getting together and talking about this new technology and sharing their learnings as we are navigating this uncharted space together.
That's a fascinating story. I think we have some similarities in that we're a bit unconventional on how we got started. And I think trying to learn by teaching is also something that I implemented, and maybe you as well, which really helps with the content sharing and, that whole process. You mentioned data lineage. Can you touch on exactly what that is, for those who don't know?
Yeah. So data lineage. And now it's funny because these days, I feel like data lineage is so important. In 2019, 2020, it was important also, but there were more pertinent challenges when it came to putting machine learning into production or data platforms. It was still very new and immature. And so now or at least I see a bit more of the conversations of data lineage and understanding where the data is coming from and what happens with the data and the data governance. Those conversations are coming up more and more. And so data lineage is really at its core is think if you can think of it like, okay, somebody clicks on our website and that event data can travel throughout the business and it can go through a data lake or it can go through S3 buckets and then it can get transformed and then it can be part of a dashboard or it can be part of some machine learning model and there's predictions that are made off of it. But what you ideally want to know is where's that data traveling from? Who is touching that data? How is it being transformed along the way? And that is what I would call data lineage. And so now there's conversations, you've probably heard some of these conversations too, around like you want to, for governance purposes, you want to be able to have teams understand what data is being used where so that if somebody changes the schema upstream somewhere, it doesn't break a few machine learning models downstream. And then you have to go play detective and be like, why is my model not working like it did yesterday?
Yeah, I definitely hear that coming up a lot. I was just talking to someone at IBM, and they have a big product on explainability for their RAG systems and their models. And I remember when I was building data pipelines too, this was a big thing that people would just want to understand what's going on with the data. So definitely still a big topic today. That's super interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
you know what I also think is fascinating on the data lineage is that it's not just a data practitioner's problem now. We're
yeah.
seeing that it's really software engineers' problem, and you hear a lot about data data folks in general should learn software engineering best practices.
Mm-hmm.
What you don't hear as much talk about is how software engineers should learn data best practices.
Yeah.
And I think that communication and that understanding will help a ton because software engineers do a lot of things that are best practices for software engineering, and they take it for granted that data folks do the same. When like the whole versioning and CI/CD that you get from software engineers, a lot of times, depending on who you're talking to in the organization and where they fall in the data vibe, we could say, like, is it a data scientist, a data engineer, or a machine
Yeah.
learning engineer? They may or may not be thinking about that thoroughly. And so it's fascinating to me to think like, okay, software engineers can really help the data teams just as much as the data teams can help the software engineers, and you need that cross organizational communication.
Yeah, and do you think we're seeing more of that now as explainability for models is needed to understand why we got the answer that we got from a model?
Oh yeah, 100%. So explainability and just recognizing that data is no longer like data is so valuable and everybody says it all the time, but it's gone from being like exhaust of the business, I think. I have a friend, Mark, who talks about this, how data used to be exhaust and it was something, if you think about a car, you put fuel in the car and then it pipes out the exhaust and the tailpipe, and that's just what happens when you're driving forward or backwards or sideways. I don't know how you like to drive your cars, but basically it's changed to being that resource, and you recognize, wow, data now can be a product and it can be something that the business is selling to others, or it can also be something that is making the company money with their machine learning predictions, right? And so it's so much more valuable than what it used to be. And it's high stakes that you get it right. And it is like at a quality standard that you would expect.
Yeah, definitely important high quality data nowadays too. Before we get into agents, I know that you've recently thought a bit about them. I wanted to ask you just about the MLOps community, one more thing. You have quite a bit of following. How do you measure how your impact? How many people do you have on your newsletter? Like I was looking at every social media you have at least 20,000 plus followers on everything, which is super impressive. And I'm sure when we met, it's so funny because I've been in the Slack for quite a while, but when we met, I realized that this was the connection again. And you have a ton of people in the Slack too. So how are you managing it all and what's the impact?
Yeah, so the nice thing about a community is that the community tends to manage itself if you're doing it right, I would say. And so that's the beauty of community, is that the community finds value from other members in it. I don't think people join the community because they see me. It's not
Yeah.
like a influencer-led community like you can get in some communities are like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's an influencer, and so I'm going to go follow this influencer, in a way that I can follow them or stay closer to them is by joining their community. For better or for worse, like my ego is totally hurt by this, right? But people join the MLOps community because there's so much value in the folks that are already in the MLOps community. It's not because I'm bringing that much incremental value that they want to go and get close to me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, you joined the Slack, right? I can only assume it is because someone told you there's valuable stuff happening in there. It's not because they said, like, have you seen Demetrius? He's doing awesome stuff.
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. Yeah. I just it's a great thing and I think I love that model that you've been able to. I was just wondering like the impact of the community. How many people would you say that you've reached probably in
Yeah,
general?
I would say the difficult thing is always deciding who is part of the community and who's not. Uh,
Yeah,
because if somebody comes to a meetup, right? it Are they a community member, or were they just someone who came to a meetup? And so that
sure.
it's always hard to think about how who's a member or who's part of the community, who's not. But we have ways, like if you were to look at it in a picture and there's like different circles and they are in varying transparency. The center of the circle, like the golden data set, I would say is
Yeah.
probably around 70,000 folks.
Wow.
And then bigger would be like people that we've touched or that have come into the orbit in some way, shape, or form. And that could go to maybe up to like 150,000 if we're being generous. But
I mean,
again,
that's
you never know.
amazing.
Like, yeah, yeah.
Congrats. I mean, that's such an accomplishment. What platform do you find the tech community nowadays is responding the best to?
So I've always been very LinkedIn native if we're talking
Mhm.
about social media. I think
Yeah,
the MLOps community is primarily on Slack, and
yeah.
that's where we get a ton of folks, and that's where most of the great discussions happen, and lots of the questions get answered, and you get real-time answers, and so we joke that it's like real-time Stack Overflow. Uh, and you have awesome people that are sharing their insights. But then what is very clear is that people want to be in person after we were all locked inside for 2 years. And 2024, we had, I think, like 30 active cities that were hosting their own meetups for the MLOps community. And so, like, anybody can decide that they want to be a local champion and they can start organizing meetups. And so, the in-person stuff I would say is probably the most valuable because that's where the jobs are being, or let me rephrase that. That's where people are finding jobs or finding hires. That's where you're getting to meet friends and really have the quote unquote high bandwidth conversations that you can have. And so, yeah, I would say don't discard the in-person stuff. We use a lot of Luma, but we also are doing virtual conferences, and those
Yeah.
are super fun too. We try and make them as fun as possible for a virtual conference.
Oh, well, amazing. Yeah, maybe we can work on something for an in-person meetup in New York since I'm in New
Yeah.
York. We'll see.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get into agents. I know that you've been thinking about them, writing about
Right.
them a bit lately, talking about them. That's also a big word in AI now. Can we start by just explaining a little bit about what you mean when you say agent?
Yeah, I would call an agent. There's a lot of different names or definitions, but I would say an agent is beyond just an LLM call because it can take action as opposed to giving you information. So it's not just the information giving, it's also the action taking. And a lot of times what they're doing to take action is using tools that you as the developer give them the access to.
So, what kind of actions are these usually?
Yeah, and this is the fun part because a lot of folks are still figuring out what the n- what the common use cases are. It still feels like it's shaken down. I've seen everything from an SRE agent that will help you with incidents to the very common one that I imagine a lot of people have heard is a support agent. So it is able to go and take actions when you're talking to a chatbot and it can,
Let me give you a refund, for
yeah.
example, maybe.
Well, that you might want to be careful with. That is awesome, but yeah, that's like probably it brings up a great point on how unstable and how it is non-deterministic. And so you're looking at something that can be very dangerous. Like I'm still afraid of giving an agent access to my credit card because yeah, I like the typical use case that you'll hear is, oh, well, I just want an agent to plan my whole vacation. I'm not fully bought in on that use case. A, because I kind of like planning my vacations, but that's just me, maybe that it's a pain for others. But the other thing is, I don't want to show up at the airport thinking that I have a flight because an agent bought it for me and then it turns out they bought me a flight to somewhere else or they bought it in someone else's name. And so, because of the non deterministic nature of machine learning and AI, those are things that you want to kind of look out for. And that's why I'm still afraid of. giving agents my credit card number.
Yeah, crazy that imagining the future of this in some great ways, and also, of course, people are imagining some scary ones. I There's an American Horror Stories series that has some Black Mirror type episodes on their season 3, and I watched one, and one actually really great is about an AI agent that kind of takes over this guy's life. It has the ability to change things. Like it bets against people to help his what he's auctioning have a higher bid, and
Mhm.
it's all good and well until it's not.
Yeah,
And that just reminded me of that as you said that. So definitely could see there could be some dangers, and I can see why people would be wary of it. But
yeah,
also there could be some really cool use cases.
yeah, yeah. And those are starting to form. I think right now we're getting very small snippets of use cases. And this is one thing that with the design patterns of agents, I think we're starting to see that you want to take as much responsibility off of the LLM as possible so that the non-determinism of the LLM plays as little of a part as it can. And so what I mean by that, like an actual example would be, and I have a friend who talks about it where he says, the most dangerous parts about cars are the humans that are driving them. And it's kind of like that with LLMs driving agents. The LLMs are the most dangerous parts of this whole piece. So let's give them the least amount of responsibility that we have to, when possible, make it as small as possible. And so, an actual example of this is when you're creating your tools, and tools are just different pieces of functionality that you can give to an LLM. So, a tool could be that it can now go and search the web, or a tool can also be that it can send an email or look over your email inbox. And so another one that's fairly common these days is looking into databases. So you can give it access to a database. And what my friend was saying is, let's imagine the scenario of you wanting to know what the batting average of Manny Ramirez was back in the day, and you have this database of all the different players and all their statistics. And so, one way of letting the LLM figure out what the batting average of Manny Ramirez was is asking it, you say, what's the batting average of Manny Ramirez? And now the LLM says, okay, I need to go and check the database for that and then search for batting average, and it will create a SQL statement to get that, right? Or you can try and make the tool usage, and the function calling is another word for this. Like function calling is pretty standard. You can make the functions that you create as small of scope as possible, and then you give it many different tools within the SQL or the database ecosystem. So instead of I'm going to put all of this responsibility onto the LLM to create the correct SQL statement to get this data that I'm looking for out of the database, you're now saying, all right, LLM, you have these 500 tools or functions, and you just choose which one is the right one. And so if it is batting average, you choose this code, and the code is deterministic. And so that's where you are starting to see a little bit of different design patterns
Hmm.
and ways that best practices are shining through in the agent building ecosystem.
Wow, that's amazing. So I've seen a lot about how people are manipulating LLMs. I'm sure there's a big risk here for manipulation since there's access. Um, what do you think this is a big risk, or what are some of the big risks and challenges of these types of systems today?
Yeah, I've thought about the ways that you can use it for nefarious reasons, and it feels like you're going to have lots of capabilities for scammers to just do more scamming.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I still am probably more worried about me shooting myself in the foot by creating an agent that has too much agency.
Yeah.
Like, if that makes sense. Right now, I think I'm my own worst enemy with the agents.
Oh, that makes sense. What are some of the challenges do you think people are having in buildings like these? Are there any others outside of just safety or this possibility that you can infiltrate it?
Yeah, the main thing, and there's so many really great insights when it comes to the UX and the UI of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because do we want to, I don't know, do you really enjoy talking to a chatbot?
Mm, no.
Me neither.
No.
Right?
I'm
That's
like, give me a real person, please.
Yeah, exactly. And whenever I can, I do the same exact thing because I don't enjoy the chat, like having me look at a blank canvas and have to articulate the problem that I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
And with chat, that's what you have to do. So it's a lot of brain power for me to okay, I'm having a problem or I have this question. Now let me go and try and articulate it in a way that a chatbot is going to understand. And so I think the main challenge that I see right now when dealing with agents is, are agents going to be interacted with through chat? That feels like, mm, I hope not. And there's cool stuff that's happening where folks are looking at other ways to bring about AI capabilities and agent capabilities that don't necessarily need you to continuously be using the chat. And that can just be like using the cursor and giving you five standard usual questions that pop
Mm-hmm.
up. And so instead of me having to write out the question, I can just click the cursor and say, whatever, this is what I'm looking for. Boom. And out of the five, or it can be follow-up questions that happen with the agents. But I'm not convinced that the UI right now is the UI that we're going to have forever. It just feels a little bit like a stepping stone, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the things I want around uh, an LLM or a chat GPT, like an extension of it, would just be a UI for a certain use case to make it easier for me to use so I don't have to every time I go in explain
Yeah.
this is what I'm trying to do. And that brings the question of how customizable are these? There's also been a rise of talk of vertical agents.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. What you're saying is, I think, the dream where I've thought about it a lot with the Microsoft is trying to do this where they release the copilots that are kind of always watching you, and then you can have them and you can interact with them, and they're on your computer, and so you can bring up AI at any moment and interact with it on your computer, supposedly. And I think Apple has sold us this dream too with their what is it? Apple Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's great. I still feel like I've seen it coming through chat, but my ideal scenario would be like what you're saying, how I'm in a application and there's a bit of intuitive nature of, okay, maybe I'm clicking around too much. Maybe there's something that I'm not taking the normal steps that someone in my position would be taking. And so there can be some intelligence, quote unquote, that pops up and says, oh, maybe you want to press this button, or maybe this is the button you're looking for, so that I don't have to explain why I am doing whatever or where I'm getting stuck to a chatbot. But as far as vertical agents go, I would say those are more, when folks talk about those, it's more like, oh, I have a support chatbot, and it is a support chatbot for a certain subset or a sector, and it's for that vertical. So you have like insurance agents that you can call on, and that's the vertical. And you have different models that maybe you want to train or fine tune, or you have smaller models that are very set on that specific vertical, and they can be called upon by a larger model when they're needed.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess I see there's customizable for you and then vertical as really detailed and has a lot of information about one type of thing. Yeah, I think that there should be some type of like UI creator that says, hey, the one thing I was thinking of, I want a journaling chat GPT app. So like I love chat GPT, but I want to make a UI just for my journaling and it evaluating patterns about me. It's like I don't want to make a startup about this because it's too small and chat GPT already does it, but I want a UI around it. I think that would also be nice, like customizable to the things that I want to use it for every day.
Yeah. And
That'd be
so
pretty cool.
it would be like back and forth with ChatGPT, more journaling, and it's
Yeah.
prompting you with questions more than you prompting it.
Yeah, yeah, or just keeping track and kind of not always having to explain everything.
Yeah.
That would be nice, I think.
Yeah.
Or there are a lot of use cases like that, I think, too. But I think we'll get there soon. We'll see.
Yeah.
People are talking a lot about agents and the economics of them or the costs of them. I know you've been thinking about it a bit. What are your thoughts? How do you decide the cost of an agent?
Oh my God. Economics of I think, is a rabbit hole that I could talk your ear off for the next, I don't know, maybe 2 hours, because there's this narrative that, oh, the cost of AI is going down. And it's true that if you look at every metric on the cost and how much an LLM call is right now, it's plummeting. However, when you start to have agents in the mix and you start to create these very complex systems, I think the cost of the answer is going up. So that may or may not make sense. I don't know if you understand where I'm coming from with that, but I can kind of add a little more color to it by saying that if you're just doing a one-shot prompt, or you're just asking ChatGPT one thing, that is very cheap, right? Cents for that API call. But now, if we start to add in that every time a user engages with something, the AI product that you have inside of your app, and that behind the scenes means that you're going to be triggering lots of different agents, you're going to be using different models, and different sizes are involved in each one of those. And then there's going to be some reasoning that happens, and then there's going to be some evaluation that happens, and there's the output, and you want to make sure that what is coming out is actually correct, or at least it's not way off base. You're adding up a whole lot of LLM calls. And it's not just the LLM calls, because you also have lots of different pieces that are involved in these complex systems. And so that's why I think the price per answer is going up when the price per token is falling.
So it seems like instead of hitting one service, now these systems are getting much more complicated, giving us better answers, but you're making a few calls. So now all these services running on GPU or CPU have another resource cost as well. And, or maybe even like have another data store too that you're maintaining. So it seems like the cost to run these systems is going up
Yeah.
by a factor of a few, right?
Yeah. And the folks that, because a lot of people say, well, you can use a small language model. It doesn't have to always be that you're using the largest, most expensive model from Anthropic or OpenAI. However, if you're using, maybe let's say you're using an open source small language model or smaller model, you still have to have folks that understand how to optimize those models. So if you're
Mhm.
fine tuning, factor in all the fine tuning costs, the GPU costs, and the workers or the people that are working on that. How much do they cost? How much is their salary? And then you're hosting the model, and how much is that? So there's a lot of complexity that has ballooned because, again, of the non-deterministic nature, and you have to deal with sometimes they hallucinate. And so we're doing all this engineering to try and make it so that the hallucinations are at a minimum, while we can still get a ton of value from it.
It sounds like a similar problem to breaking out of the monolith
Hmm.
and having a bunch of microservices.
Yeah.
How do you advise people, or how do you think people should know when doing something like this is worth it? When is it okay just to have the monolith,
Yeah.
Chat GPT or Anthropic, the main thing, or and when is it worth it to have these highly specialized models?
Yeah, the thing about the agents and the agent architecture is that you're going to get much better results generally. Of course, it's hard to generalize because each use case is different and
Mhm.
you never really know. So it's like start with the most simple, easiest thing possible, and then start adding complexity as you realize it's not good enough for what you're trying to do. And then you can have that cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, I like that thought process. Start simple and then just tailor it to what you need instead of trying to overcomplicate it from the beginning.
And
What
this,
would you say? Sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, yeah. I was just gonna say that that also goes for you can start by prompt engineering, and that will probably, hopefully, get you solving your problems. And you want to take prompt engineering as far as you can before
Mhm.
you decide, all right, now let's go to a RAG system. And you want to then you go to the RAG system and you take that as far as you can. And then, because I hear people throw around fine tuning like it's so easy and it's just something that we'll do next. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, do you really recognize what you need to fine tune? It's not just something that you can, you know, offhand just do. And so
Yeah. What is the cost with fine tuning?
I think the major cost is just folks who understand how to do it well, and fine tuning. Also, the thing I was literally just talking with a friend about this yesterday. He was talking about how a lot of times the first time around when you fine tune, the model comes out worse. And so you don't really know, A, if the model is going to be better when you fine tune it. And you're not going to know until it's done. You like basically are baking the cake in the oven for a few
Mhm.
days, and then it comes out and you're like, let's try it, let's taste it. And you taste it, and it's like, oh, maybe we added a little too much salt. And we got to try it again.
Yeah, it seems like it's a research heavy trial and error. So having people who know what they're doing, and probably those people aren't cheap either.
Yeah. That's what I think the major cost is. There are GPU costs involved, and there is data. Like, think about all the data that you need to curate. How are you curating that data? How are you making sure that golden data set is actually valuable? That sounds expensive just thinking about it, right? Like, are you going to have human annotators, or are you going to have LLMs that annotate it? And if the LLMs annotate it, you still have to have somebody that's checking that out. But by no means, like, I don't want to say that this is the only use case, because I've also heard other cool use cases or ways to think about AI and LLMs that is worth mentioning. And one of these ways is thinking about taking the unstructured and making it structured. So you can have an LLM just be another step in your DAG, and it can be a transformation step from unstructured to structured. So that can be like a classification type of thing. You
Mhm.
get a bunch of support requests, and one of the steps in the DAG can be that you're classifying these support requests as angry or good, bad, whatever you
Yeah.
want to classify them as. And then it can go into a database like structured data.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good use case. And how are businesses approaching this pricing model? What do you think is an effective way for business to do that?
Oh my God, this is another one that I think is fascinating because it used to be that when folks would engage with your product, that was a good thing. But now, if on the back end you've got like 10 LLM calls when someone engages with your LL or your AI feature, now you're like, ooh, maybe too much engagement is not good because we're going to go bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
Think about that. If I now am a super user of your AI feature and you now have to take all of my engagement and all my usage of your feature and add that to your cost of goods, you might start adding some guardrails around what and how I use your AI feature. And so I find that fascinating because it's really like you should probably be factoring in these AI API calls as cost of goods sold. And it can really like the pricing, the way that folks are pricing it right now, I'm not sure is the way that we will eventually land on pricing, but it is fascinating for me to think about that in especially when it comes to consumer,
Yeah.
because consumer, you want more engagement on your app. But if your app is powered by LLMs, then you're like, ooh, maybe a little engagement is all right, but too much is not good.
What an interesting concept because when I worked for Bluecore, it was a intelligent email marketing company, and we had a lot of events. How many clicks do you get? How many opens? Everything was about wanting more and more and more views,
Like,
more everything. But in this sense, you're right, like more hits, more requests. But in this sense, we want to see that you're there, but not often, maybe.
yeah.
We want to see that we answer the question or get it right the first time, which is a bit different of a process.
Yeah, and mentality and the way that we've been creating products for so
Yeah.
actually we had one of our virtual conferences that we recently had was the AI Agents in Production virtual conference. And one of the companies that was giving a talk was OLX. And there, for those that don't know OLX, they do a lot of like, it's a marketplace, like a secondhand marketplace. So, like Facebook Marketplace
Mm-hmm.
for Europeans. And it's really big in Poland and Portugal and these type of places. And they created something that's called OLX Magic. It's their agent. And what they did, they were showing me this, and I thought it was hilarious because I was going through the app and they said, "All right, so what's something you would want to buy?" And I said, "Oh, well, let's check out cars. Do you guys sell cars?" They said, "Yeah, yeah, we have cars." And so we were looking up uh, hybrid cars, Toyota hybrids. And we looked it up. The agent brought up a bunch of cool examples, and then you can chat with the different examples that it's bringing up. And that was part of the agent feature, right? So you can start saying, okay, because it was the app was in Poland, it was with Schlotzskis, or forgive me for anyone that actually knows how to say the Polish currency, because I don't think it's Schlotzskis. I make jokes about them being Schlotzskis, but it's not, I don't think. So back to the story. The app was saying, okay, it's all whatever, X amount of Schlotzkis. And I'm sitting there thinking, how much is that in euros? Because I live in Germany and I don't know what Schlotzkis mean. And so then we asked, how much is that in euros? And it gave us it. And then I thought, okay, well, how do I transfer the license from a Polish license to a German license? And the guy who was giving me the demo looked at me and he said, "No, we can't do that. Like, we're not your chat GPT. We have guardrails on things." And I'm like, "Oh, all right." So there's
Yeah.
things that they will do and things they won't do. And he also
Yeah.
mentioned that they found between 3 and 7 interactions with the AI product, that's the sweet spot. Over 7 is someone just toying with it and it doesn't really help with conversion. Under 3, they're not really getting what they need and they're not willing to put in the time. But between 3 and 7, they saw that the conversion goes up. And so they had that clear metric, and if you know that, then you can kind of rate limit if there's too many and do things around it. But still, that's it's fascinating to think about that type of stuff when it comes to the economics of the agents.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I like that they had the data about what was working and what wasn't and made some decisions, even though maybe you can't get all the answers, or there are other cases where people just will hit the limit and it won't work for them. For most people, they found what does work and what works for their costs, which I think it seems very data driven as well.
Yeah. But one thing that I would say is that they are taking a percentage of a secondhand sale, right? And I don't know what the average sale price is on the app, but it's not like I don't think they're selling a lot of cars on the app. I think it's
Yeah.
more like consumer goods type of stuff. Like think your secondhand jacket, or I don't know, what was the last stuff that you sold secondhand? I maybe sold a table from my house. And the point I'm trying to make is that if they're taking a percentage of a $50 table that I'm selling, but the percentage is what, like, let's say they take 8%. I don't know
Hmm.
exactly how much they take, but theoretically, if they take 8% of $50 and I did 7 LLM calls, now that whatever 8% is so much less.
Yeah. So how do you think that companies looking forward are going to make decisions about pricing on these AI agents based on the return of investment that they're getting?
Yeah, so that's in a consumer facing AI agent use case, right? But then you have the other side of the coin where it is helping relieve the burden of support personnel.
Hmm.
And so if you now can help more support tickets or service more support tickets without needing to hire new people, you're looking at a whole different economical model or value that it's bringing. So I think in that case, it's totally different depending on the eye of the beholder type of scenario. Like, what is the value that it's bringing to who? And if you can clearly articulate that, wow, 10% or 20% of our support tickets are getting serviced before they need to be escalated up to a human, then that means that 20% you have the need of 20% less workforce, right? So I don't know. There's a lot of open-ended questions with it and how it's being implemented. And that's what I think is the fascinating part of this. I'm really like trying to dig in and see the use cases and see where there is an enormous amount of value and it's very clear. And then other places where it's like for consumer, and you're starting to think, how can we properly price this? Is it going to be that this is a pro feature that we're going to be asking a consumer to pay a membership to? I don't know that, and that's really not clear at all yet.
If the companies providing AI, things like ChatGPT, if they were to include price transparency about the costs of the model or the cost of using it, what do you think that would look like? Do you think that that would feel fair for the price that they give us, or how do you think they're pricing it?
So like for example, the OLX magic AI feature that they have, AI agent feature that they have, if every time that you're interacting with it, you see how much it's actually costing.
Yeah, yeah. Or the things that we actually pay for, like ChatGPT, like $20 a month.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that if there were pricing transparency, that it would feel fair? Like, do you think it's overpriced or underpriced, or do you think it's probably priced about right?
I feel like the amount of value that we're getting from it is it's probably still underpriced. Uh, but that's me personally because I am constantly using it. And also, I I think it's hard because a lot of them are still free.
Yeah.
Perplexity is a really good tool and it's free. And for the most part, right? You can use it, you can get pretty far with free perplexity. And so I'm still very I have no idea what and how it's going to shake out. But the other thing is that I will go back to the other part on like the interface and how we interact with it. If someone if you find ways to add AI into your product that is almost like eliminating friction for the user. And I'll go back to another example of Honeycomb. And do you know Honeycomb .io? They're like I think they're a monitoring or observability company. And there's this guy that works there, Philip, and he writes a lot about how they're bringing AI features into their platform. And I interviewed him for our podcast a while back, and I asked him, like, how do you make this make sense numbers wise? And he had it very clear because he said, look, our average sale is at, 60 to 100K. And if I can get someone to do this inside of the app, the likelihood of them becoming a customer is like 80% more probable.
Wow.
So that means that let's just try and create an AI feature that will help someone do that exact thing inside the app because it gets them very far on their journey and it helps them become a pro user. And the LLM calls, the price that they pay for LLM calls really feels minuscule compared to the value that they're getting on the contract.
Yeah, that makes sense. With so many different players in the AI space now, so many people probably going to implement these AI agents, how do you think different companies can differentiate themselves in general and with respect to pricing?
Yeah. Hmm. I mean, make something that works.
Yeah,
That's probably the first thing. That
something
is
valuable.
very reliably works reliably is you would think it's table stakes, but in the AI world,
Yeah,
so that's probably the first thing. But yeah, the other thing is if we can make the user experience magic, because I think you see a lot of times for users that aren't willing to put in the time to learn and really go deep on what this new assistant can do for you or what this AI feature really is capable of. If you don't put the time in to learn, you don't really get the benefits of it. And from the product analytics standpoint, I know a few friends who are implementing agents and they talk about how that's the biggest fear that they have is they have these awesome agents, but because it is a little finicky in the way that maybe the first time you ask it to do something, it doesn't do it, even though it is possible that the agent can do that. It's just that the way that you prompted it or the way you asked for it did not get it to do it. And so you as a user have to think a little bit harder about how you're going to make it do the thing that you want it to do. And for the majority of people, I think they just give up.
yeah, yeah, I totally get that. And I think making something good will differentiate yourself, even though that seems obvious.
Yeah.
It's true. A lot of people are experimenting with this. It's something relatively new as far as how many people are implementing it, and having something that just works well will make a big difference.
Yeah. Works
Easier said
well.
than
It
done.
is easy to use. Yeah. It's it and it's easier said than done. I fully agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will start to try to implement these AI agents to, automate a lot of tasks for us. And as we discussed, it's a bit of a Black Mirror type episode, maybe. But I bet people are wondering, how far away do you think we are from mainstream adoption of this? How far away are we from having a real agent that's like an assistant actually managing our lives?
I don't. Uh, that's a great. It's hard to predict the future, right? I wish I knew what would happen. I wonder if it will be like we get it from like we see mainstream adoption, I think is the big question there. Because that in my mind is still unclear if we're going to see like everyone has cell phones now. It's ridiculous to think that
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't have a mobile phone, right? I'm not sure that we can take it as a given that we're going to see everyone with agents
Yeah.
or agent assistants type thing. That still is up in the air. I hope it becomes so easy that we can have these agents that do stuff for us and it's very easy to interact with them. But yeah, even another agent paradigm is voice too, right? We didn't even get into voice. And the ever since you look at a lot of the sci-fi movies or sci-fi books, and the majority of them, people are interacting with their machines through voice. It's not
True.
through a keyboard or a touch screen as much.
True, yeah. Typing can be quite limiting for sure. I think regardless, people will try soon, and it's advancing so quickly that I don't know, like you said, how ubiquitous it'll be, how much, if all of us will be using it, but I know probably soon people will try.
Yeah.
So, in that vein, also, what do you predict as far as AI for 2025?
I think agents, it's the year of the agents. If 2024 wasn't already the year of agents for AI, because agents also they make RAGs more reliable in that you have less hallucinations. So a RAG system where it's really just retrieving information and then generating a bit of information on top of the retrieved stuff. So it's like glorified search in a way, a RAG system, but
Yeah.
to make sure that the RAG or what it retrieves is the right stuff, and also when something is generated is also the right stuff, or it pertains to the question that was asked, you get you can throw in some agents or some reflections in there, and it can have less hallucinations. So I would say agents in 2025, 100%. I would like to see some new way that we can interact with agents, and maybe it's going to be that standing up agents is much easier on the back end, because right now it's very piecemeal, and
Hmm.
the ways that in the back end, the architectures that we're using, everyone's exploring. And so if we can come to some common design patterns with agents that work, then it will allow us, I think, on the front end to experiment a lot more too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I always like to leave with one last question, and that's, do
Right.
you have any other advice or last thing to say for our users? For our listeners, not users.
I One thing that I find fascinating is there's so many incredible people that are doing such cool stuff, and it's behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a huge proponent of uh, we all have expertise in something, and there's so much slop out there with the AI generated crap that you get on the internet. Like now is when real expertise and folks who are doing great stuff, if we can just create more, whatever your flavor of creating is, I think that is don't be afraid to put it out there is probably the main thing, because I know a lot of people that are doing good stuff but they aren't sharing it, and
Mhm.
that always makes me a little bit sad inside.
Yeah, I agree. That's why open source is great too.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a great conversation. I
It's
thoroughly
so
enjoyed
cool.
it.
I appreciate you inviting me on here and asking such thoughtful questions.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Alexa's Input. Make sure to subscribe so you know when the next episode comes out. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at Alexa's Input. Finally, any donations are welcome. You can go click the link on in the description, go to the Anchor page, and I do take donations because I edit and record these podcasts on my own. So those are very much appreciated. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.